We normally convince people with facts and evidence until there aren't any. So what convinces them the rest of the time? Try this before disagreeing with it. Changing what someone believes usually has less to do with their opinions or their facts than with rearranging the room they're standing in. Humans adapt to new environments quickly. Drop someone into a new job, and within a few weeks their posture has changed, their vocabulary has picked up the office's shorthand, and what counted as normal a month ago doesn't anymore. What's stranger is how rarely anyone notices that happening. Someone can always tell you why they made a decision. Ask what else was sitting nearby right before they made it, and most people go quiet. Their explanation almost never mentions the work the room itself was doing. So the real question is this: if one room can quietly edit one person without that person noticing, what happens once someone builds a room large enough to hold millions? In 1936, the psychologist Kurt Lewin proposed a formula that still shapes behavioral science. Behavior is a function of the person and the environment. B equals F of P, E. It sounds almost too simple to matter, and it's one of the more quietly radical ideas in 20th century psychology because it says something uncomfortable. Who you are in a given moment is not fixed. It's negotiated constantly with the space around you. You can watch this play out in places designed with intention. Supermarkets put milk at the back, so getting to it means walking past nearly everything else the store wants you to notice first. Casinos go further. No clocks, no windows, nothing in the room to remind you how much time has actually passed. None of this requires anyone to lie to you, only someone deciding in advance which choice will be the path of least resistance, and then building the room around that choice. Richard Thaler and Cass Sunstein gave this a name in 2008, choice architecture. There is no neutral way to present options. A default setting is already a nudge, whether or not anyone intended it as one. Default effects make the case concretely. Countries where organ donation is opt-out report donor rates in the range of 90% or higher, while countries where it's opt-in often sit below 20%. And the two groups don't differ much in stated values. They differ in which box came pre-checked. Most of us still describe our choices as independent. The research keeps suggesting otherwise, at least for a meaningful share of them, and the person making the choice is usually the last one to know it wasn't entirely theirs. This idea didn't stay in psychology labs for long. It got noticed by people who wanted to move large numbers of people at once, and once it was noticed, it was used. Edward Bernays, Sigmund Freud's nephew, is often credited as the founder of modern public relations. In 1929, he staged what the press called the Torches of Freedom March, hiring women to smoke cigarettes publicly during a New York parade, reframing a stigmatized habit as an act of feminist rebellion. Cigarette sales among women rose in the years after. The public didn't need convincing that smoking was safe. A new social environment did that work instead.
One where smoking suddenly meant something different
than it had a year earlier.
Gustave Le Bon, writing decades earlier in The Crowd in 1895, argued that individuals in a crowd don't just behave differently, they think differently, losing a portion of their individual judgment to something closer to a group organism. Whether or not you accept his full theory, wartime propaganda offices on every side of both world wars operated as if he were right, leaning hard on posters and radio broadcasts built around a shared insight. You don't need to win an argument with someone if you can first change the crowd they're standing in. Institutions that discover behavior is more predictable than expected rarely walk away from what they've found. More often, they build around it and keep building. Move that same logic into the present, and the supermarket aisle becomes a feed. Infinite scroll removes the natural stopping point a page used to give you. Notifications borrow directly from B.F. Skinner's variable ratio reinforcement schedules, the same mechanism gambling researchers point to when explaining why slot machines are so hard to walk away from, because a reward that arrives unpredictably gets pursued harder than one that arrives on schedule. Recommendation systems personalize the room itself, so two people scrolling the same platform at the same hour are, in a meaningful sense, standing in two different buildings. Systems optimized for a single measurable goal, in this case attention, will find whatever psychological lever moves that number, whether or not anyone on the team ever used the word manipulation in a meeting. Robert Cialdini's work on social proof explains why a post with visible likes changes how you read it before you've read a word of it. Availability bias explains why whatever you scrolled past most recently feels like a bigger share of reality than it actually is. That same room no longer needs four walls. It fits in a pocket and rearranges itself around you personally, a scale of tailoring Lewin never had to account for in 1936. There's a harder version of this question once you turn it towards your own life. What environment do you spend most of your waking life inside? For a lot of us, it isn't a physical room anymore, so much as a feed, one that has learned what you already click on and keeps adjusting itself around that until it stops feeling like software and starts feeling like surroundings. Confirmation bias means the environment you build for yourself by choosing who to follow and what to read starts confirming itself back to you. Echo chambers aren't usually built by someone else. Most of the time, you built yours, one click at a time, and each of those clicks felt, at the time, like an independent reasoned choice, which is part of what makes it hard to notice later. Solomon Asch's 1951 conformity experiments found that a striking share of participants, roughly a third across trials, gave an answer they knew was wrong simply because everyone around them had said it first. Nobody threatened them, and nobody argued with them. The room did the work instead. If a handful of strangers in a lab can bend a stated fact, an information environment you sit inside for 6 or 8 hours a day has a much longer runway to work with. Here's the part that should actually unsettle you more than any of the history above. We are, broadly, good at spotting influence in other people. Obvious enough the moment a friend gets talked into something by a salesperson. Turn that same question on ourselves, though, and the accuracy collapses. This has a name in the literature, the bias blind spot, documented by Emily Pronin and colleagues in the early 2000s, showing that people rate themselves as less susceptible to bias than the average person, even while rating others accurately. Most of us assume we're the exception, which the data says is unlikely. Add cognitive dissonance to that. Leon Festinger's 1957 theory holds that once we've acted a certain way, we tend to retroactively adjust our stated beliefs to match the action, rather than the other way around, specifically to avoid the discomfort of holding two contradicting ideas at once. That means the story you tell about why you chose something is frequently written after the choice, not before it. A convincing story that's also, often, a reconstruction. So how would you know you were adapting if the adaptation itself feels like clarity? I don't think the honest ending here is a confident one. Real influence, most of the time, probably isn't a hand forcing you in a direction. It's closer to a room arranged so that moving in one particular direction simply feels like the obvious thing to do, the thing you'd have chosen anyway. If that's closer to true than not, the more useful question isn't who's influencing you, but whether you can still see the room you're standing in at all, or whether by now it just looks like the world.